Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The city of Kronos stood as a gleaming testament to humanity, its delicate relationship with time. Nestled within the fabric of reality, the city was invisible to those who lived their lives unaware of its existence, yet it governed everything, every second that ticked, every hour that passed. The timekeepers, sworn protectors of the timeline, watched from above, ensuring that history unfolded as it should. At the heart of this city was a young woman named Sophie, a newly trained time weaver, still learning the intricacies of her gift. Unlike the timekeepers, whose responsibility was to observe and protect, time weavers had the extraordinary ability to mend rifts in time itself. Sophie's delicate fingers could stitch moments back together, aligning history in ways that made the past present and future whole again. Yet for all her talent, Sophie felt the weight of inexperience pressing on her shoulder. She stood at the edge of the great spire, looking out over the twisting threads of time that stretched endlessly in every direction. Beneath her lay the city of time, its shimmering pathways lined with impossible architecture, buildings that defied gravity, spiraled upward, and dissolved into mist. The air smelled of ancient stone and polished glass, tinged with the energy of countless moments stacked upon one another. Master and her mentor and one of the oldest timekeepers approached her silently, his white robes fluttering in the faint breeze that always seemed to blow through Kronos. "You feel it, Dom, to you?" he asked, his voice soft yet full of authority. "Via the pull of the threads, they call to you." Sophie nodded, her eyes tracing the invisible patterns she alone could see. Tyrice sensed something shifting. Master Ensra's face darkened. "It is more than just a shift. A rift has opened, a large one, larger than anything we've seen in centuries." Sophie's heart quickened. "Where? How? Vernon turned, gesturing toward the far horizon, where time itself seemed to ripple like water disturbed by an unseen hand. "It sends in the deep past, but its effects will ripple forward, collapsing the delicate balance of history if it's not repaired." The news hit Sophie with a surge of panic, but also a strange excitement. She had trained for this. Every lesson, every week she had learned, had been to prepare her for the moment when time itself would need her to step forward. "I'll go," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "So fix it." Aaron gave her a measured look. "This is no ordinary rift, Sophie. Something is causing these disturbances on purpose. This is not a natural tear in the fabric of time. Whoever or whatever is behind this seeks to use time as a weapon." Sophie swallowed hard. She had read about rogue timekeepers, those who had sought to control the timeline for their own gain, but they were thought to be long gone, defeated in the Battle of Kronos. Erin's eyes softened. "I believe in you, Sophie, but you must not do this alone. The rift is large, and the damage it causes will affect more than just one moment. You'll need to gather allies from different eras, those who can help you in ways even we timekeepers cannot." Before Sophie could ask more, Orin raised his hand and a glowing portal began to swirl before them. The air around it shimmered with power. "This will take you to the source of the rift," he said. "Big good lucks." Sophie hesitated only for a moment, then stepped forward into the portal, feeling the familiar sensation of time bending around her as she passed through. The world blurred, the past and future rushing by in a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds, until she landed firmly in another place, another time. She stood in the middle of a battlefield, ancient, rugged, and brutal. Warriors clashed in the distance, swords clanging, shields splintering, and the ground beneath her feet shook with the weight of countless battles fought here. Sophie barely had time to take it all in when a figure rushed toward her, sword raised. Marcus, a tall, broad-shouldered man, clad in the armor of a forgotten age, charged at her, his eyes filled with fury. "Wait," Sophie cried, raising her hand. Marcus hesitated, his sword still poised to strike. "Who are you, Fee?" he demanded, his voice rough like gravel. "I'm not your enemy," Sophie shouted over the din of battle. "Here I am, here to fix what's wrong with time." Marcus narrowed his eyes, then, as if sensing some truth in her words, lowered his sword slightly. "Yeah, time, what do you mean?" Before Sophie could explain, a great crack echoed through the sky. Both of them looked up in horror as the fabric of reality itself seemed to tear apart. The rift opened wider, its edges glowing with unstable energy. Through it, glimpses of another world flickered, a future world of machines and metal. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a tear in time. It was a fusion of two timelines, one from the distant past and one from the far future. The timelines were colliding. "We need to go," Sophie said urgently. "If we don't how to stop it, your world will be lost and the future will be destroyed." Marcus didn't fully understand, but the urgency in her voice was enough. He nodded, dryly the way. Together they ran toward the center of the battlefield, where the rift loomed larger. As they approached, Sophie raised her hands, feeling the energy of time itself course through her fingers. She began weaving, her hands moving in intricate patterns as she attempted to close the rift, but it was too strong, too unstable. "Something's blocking me," she muttered, frustrated. "Perhaps I can fix it alone." "Then we find whoever's silly causing this and stop them," Hiram Marcus growled. Before Sophie could respond, a figure stepped out of the rift. Clad in futuristic armor, sleek and silver, with glowing blue lines running across its surface, the figure was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Elara, a scientist from a distant future, emerged, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She too had been drawn here by the rift, though for entirely different reason. "Who are you?" Sophie, sensing that this woman was from the future, approached cautiously to Ray. "I am Sophie. I am a time weaver. I am here to fix the rift." Allure raised an eyebrow. "A time weaver? You're meddling with forces beyond your understanding." "This isn't just a rift, it's at the gateway, and someone is using it to reshape history." Marcus stepped forward, sword still in hand. "Then help us stop them." Elder considered for a moment, then nodded. "I can trace the source of the disturbance, but we'll need to move quickly. Whoever is behind this is manipulating time on a scale we've never seen before." The unlikely trio, Sophie, Marcus, and Elara, set off across the battlefield, moving toward the heart of the disturbance. As they walked, Elara explained that she had been studying anomalies in the timeline when the rift pulled her into the past. Her world, a future of advanced technology and AI governance, was collapsing as the timelines merged. "I've never seen anything like this," Halala admitted. The amount of power it would take to create a rift this size is unimaginable." Sophie remained quiet, her thoughts racing. Someone was behind this. Someone who understood the inner workings of time itself. But who and what? As they approached the edge of the battlefield, the sky above them darkened, and the rift seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Sophie felt it deep in her bones. This wasn't just about fixing time anymore. Something far more dangerous was at play. "You're close," Elara said, checking a device on her wrist. "MRSO, the source of the rift is just ahead." The three of them pressed on, their resolve hardening as they moved closer to the unknown force behind the chaos. The trio moved swiftly, the ground beneath them shaking as they approached the heart of the rift. And activity in the background, as if time itself were holding its breath. Sophie, Marcus, and Elara were all focused on the same point ahead, a glowing orb of pulsing energy that hovered in the air, crackling with power. As they drew closer, a figure stepped out from behind the orb. He was tall, cloaked in shadow, his face obscured by a dark hood. His hands, however, glowed with the same eerie energy as the rift. He looked up, and Sophie caught a glimpse of his eyes, cold, calculating, and ancient. This was the Time Weaver. "You've come far, Time Weaver," the figure said, his voice smooth and deep, reverberating through the air. "But you were too late. The timeline is already mine." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. "You were the one causing the rift. Why, what do you gain by destroying history?" The Time Weaver chuckled, the sound cold and devoid of humor. "Destroy number. I'm not destroying history, little Weaver. I'm reshaping it. Controlling time means controlling everything past, present, future. With the timeline under my command, I will reign eternal." Marcus stepped forward, his sword gleaming in the light of the rift. "You want to get away with this. We'll stop you." The Time Weaver's gaze flicked to Marcus, a sneer curling his lip. A relic of the past, how quaint. He raised a hand and a wave of energy shot toward them. Marcus barely had time to raise his shield before the force slammed into him, knocking him back several feet. Elara quickly pulled out a device from her belt and began tapping furiously. "I am trying to stabilize the rift, but his power is too strong. We need to disrupt the energy field he's slowly generating." Sophie's mind raced. The threads of time were visible to her, now vibrating and snapping all around them, tangled in the time reaver sense manipulation. She had to act fast. She reached out with her hands, her fingers weaving through the air as she attempted to untangle the knots in time. The time reaver watched her with mild amusement. "You think you can stop me with that little trick? You don't truly understand the true power of time weaver, but I can teach you." He extended his hand towards Sophie, and suddenly the world around her shifted. She was no longer on the battlefield. Instead, she stood in a massive library, endless shelves filled with books that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a place outside of time, a repository of all knowledge, past, present, and future. The time reaver appeared beside her, his form less menacing in this space, though his presence was still oppressive. "This is what I offer you, Sophie, unlimited knowledge, the power to control time itself. You could fix every broken moment, rewrite history to your will. No more mistakes, no more loss, only perfection." Sophie looked around, her heart aching with the temptation. She had always wanted to understand time more deeply, to protect it. But something about the time reaver's offer felt wrong, too easy, too dangerous. She turned to him, her resolve hardening. "Time isn't time meant to be controlled. It's meant to flow naturally. You can rewrite the past without losing the future." The time reaver's expression darkened. "Foolish girl, you don't see the truth. The timeline is fragile, vulnerable to those who understand its power. If you don't control it, someone else will. I'm offering you the chance to be its master, not its servant." Sophie shook her head. I won. Can I become like you?" With that, she wrenched herself out of the illusion, the library dissolving into mist as the battlefield reappeared around her. Marcus and Allure were still struggling against the time reaver's energy, but Sophie could feel the power surging through her. Now she understood what she had to do. "Allure," Sophie called, "I need you to disrupt his energy field. Marcus, hold him off as long as you can." Allure nodded, her fingers flying over her device as she worked to destabilize the energy around the rift. Marcus, bruised but determined, charged at the time reaver sword raised high. The time reaver met him with a blast of energy, but Marcus blocked it with his shield, pushing forward with sheer force of will. Sophie focused on the threads of time, her hands moving faster, now weaving and unweaving the broken pieces of history. The rift flickered, its edges beginning to close, but the time reaver was still too strong. "You can stop me, Weaver," the time reaver snarled, his eyes glowing with fury. "I've spent centuries preparing for this." But Sophie wasn't listening. She reached deeper into the fabric of time, past the rift, past the chaos, to the very heart of the timeline itself. She felt that their time, its true essence, the core of its power. And with a final surge of energy, she wove the threads back together, creating a new possibility. The rift shuddered, the light around it dimming as the threads of time began to realign. The time reaver screamed in rage, his form flickering as the timeline rejected him. "No," he roared, his body dissolving into the very energy he had sought to control. "This isn't over, Weaver. Time will be mine." With one final scream, the time reaver was gone, his presence erased from the timeline as the rift snapped shut with a resounding crack. Silence fell over the battlefield. The air was still the chaos of the rift, now a distant memory. Sophie, exhausted but triumphant, collapsed to her knees, her hands still trembling from the strain of the weave. Marcus approached her, his sword lowered, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You did it," he said, offering her a hand. "You actually did it." Sophie smiled weakly as she took his hand and stood not alone. "We did it together." Allure approached her device, now silent, the threat of the rift finally gone. "That was incredible," she admitted, her usually cool demeanor softening. "I didn't think it was possible." Sophie shrugged, still catching her breath. "I didn't either, but sometimes you just have to trust in time." The three of them stood there for a moment, the weight of what they had accomplished settling in. The timeline was safe for now, but Sophie knew that time was a living, breathing thing, and there would always be threats. There would always be those who sought to control it. As they prepared to part ways, Sophie felt a pang of sadness. She had grown close to Marcus and Allure in such a short time, and now they would return to their own eras, their own lives. But the bonds they had formed would remain, woven into the very fabric of time itself. Marcus clapped Sophie on the shoulder. "If you ever need a warrior from the past, you know where to find me." Allure smiled, a rare expression for her. "And if you ever need future tech, just call. I owe you one." Sophie laughed, the tension of the last few hours finally easing. Thank you, both of you. I couldn't have done this without you. With that, they each stepped into the portals that would take them back to their own timeline. Sophie watched as they disappeared, the world around her returning to the calm, steady flow of time. She stood alone for a moment, her hands still tingling with the power of the weed. Master Oren-san's voice echoed in her mind. You feel it. Don't you? The pull of the thread. She did, and she knew that as long as there were threats to time, her journey as a time weaver was far from over. Sophie turned and walked back toward the portal that would take her home to Kronos, the city of time. Her heart was lighter now, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She would protect the timeline, not with control, but with understanding. Because time, like life, was meant to flow freely, and she would be there always to ensure that it did.